All right, let's get into it. Today, we are diving deep into some of the toughest IGCSE biology questions out there. We're going to break down what makes them so tricky and, more importantly, give you a solid game plan to answer them like a pro. You know that feeling, right? You're in the exam, you're staring at a question, you've revised the topic, you know the material, but your mind just goes completely blank. You have no idea where to even start. Well, trust me, you are not the only one feeling that way. The hardest questions aren't just about memorizing facts. They're actually designed to see if you can take what you know and apply it to a totally new situation. But here's the good news, and it's a bit of a secret. They all follow certain patterns. Once you learn how to spot these, you can build a strategy to handle pretty much anything the exam throws at you. So in this explainer, we are going to show you exactly how to crack that code. Okay, so first things first. Before we can defeat the beast, we have to understand it. What is it exactly that makes some biology questions feel almost impossible?
Well, it's usually a mix of things. Sometimes you're faced with a scenario you've never seen before. Other times it's a long multi-part question, or you have to pull information from a tricky graph. And then there are those command words like explain or evaluate that demand so much more than a simple answer. Plus, you've always got to use that precise scientific language. And of course, some topics like genetics or homeostasis are just, well, they're abstract and a bit tough to get your head around.
Now that we know what we're up against, it's time for a battle plan. And listen, the key here is not to panic. It's to have a simple, reliable strategy that you can pull out of your back pocket every single time you feel stuck. And here is your simple 3-step strategy. Step 1, decode the question. Seriously, become a detective. Underline the keywords, circle that command word, and, this is crucial, check how many marks it's worth. That tells you how much detail the examiner really wants. Step 2, plan your answer. Even just a quick 10-second brainstorm to jot down your main points can give your answer a logical flow. And finally, step 3, write with precision. Use the correct biological terms, because that shows the examiner that you're not just guessing, you really know your stuff. All right, enough theory. Let's put this strategy to the test with a real-world example. We're going to start with a topic that trips up a lot of students, genetics.
Okay, here we go. We've got 2 red tomato plants. Simple enough. But they end up having some offspring with yellow fruit. So the question is, how is that even possible if red is dominant? That's the puzzle we need to solve.
Okay, let's think this through. For an offspring to have yellow fruit, which is a recessive trait, it must have 2 copies of the recessive allele. Its genotype has to be r. Now, where did it get those 2 alleles from? Well, it got one from each parent. But wait, both parents are red, which means they must have the dominant big R allele. So the only way this whole thing works is if both parents are heterozygous, meaning they each have one dominant and one recessive allele, big R, little r. Now for the next part. We need to calculate the expected ratio. But look at those 3 magic words. Show you're working. That is a massive hint from the examiner. It's basically them screaming at you, please draw me a Punnett square. And here's what that looks like. We just draw our Punnett square, we put the gametes from one heterozygous parent, big R and little r, across the top, and the gametes from the other parent down the side. Then we just fill in the boxes to see all the possible combinations for their offspring. We get RR, RR, and RR. So, looking at our results, we have 1 RR box and 2 RR boxes. Since the big R allele is dominant, all 3 of those combinations will give us red fruit. Then we have just 1 box with small r, which gives us yellow fruit. And there it is. That gives us our classic expected ratio of 3 red to 1 yellow. Simple as that. Let's switch gears and tackle another famously tricky topic, homeostasis. Now, these questions can feel tough because they're all about explaining a sequence of events. You have to get the steps in the right order. So here's our scenario. Someone chugs a big bottle of water. We need to explain step by step how their body responds. And check out the marks. 5 marks. That is your signal that you need to write a detailed story with a clear beginning, middle, and end, making sure to talk about the hormone ADH. So, where does our story begin? It all starts in the brain. As that water gets absorbed, the blood becomes more watery, or dilute, and the hypothalamus in the brain, which is always monitoring things, immediately notices this change.
As soon as the grain spots the change, it sends a message to the pituitary gland. And that message is basically, whoa, ease up. The pituitary gland follows orders and releases less of a hormone called ADH, which stands for antidiuretic hormone, into the blood.
Now, ADH has a very specific job to do, and its target is the kidneys. It controls how much water they reabsorb. So when there's less ADH floating around in the blood, the collecting ducts and tubules in the kidneys become less permeable to water. You can think of it like their walls are becoming less leaky.
And what's the direct result of that? Well, because those tubule walls aren't as leaky anymore, less water can escape from the tubules and get reabsorbed back into the blood. That water is now basically trapped inside the kidney tubules with nowhere else to go.
And that leads us to the final outcome. All that extra water that wasn't reabsorbed just keeps flowing through the kidneys until it's finally excreted from the body. The result? A large volume of very dilute urine. And just like that, we've told the complete story from start to finish, hitting all 5 marks. So we've walked through 2 completely different but equally challenging types of questions. Before we finish up, let's just quickly recap the most important strategies with some top tips that examiners wish every student knew. Honestly, this advice is pure gold. If a question asks you to compare, use the actual numbers from the graph. Don't just say what happened, explain why it happened. Show that cause and effect. Always show you're working. You can get marks for your method even if your final answer has a tiny mistake. For homeostasis, just remember that story structure: detection, response, outcome. And finally, and this is a big one, remember that every mistake you find and fix when you're revising is a huge win. That's one less mark you're going to lose when it really counts.
You see, by understanding the patterns, using a clear strategy, and just practicing these techniques, even the scariest questions become totally manageable. At the end of the day, the key isn't just knowing all the biology facts, it's about knowing how to use them. Fundoo Tutor is a personalized learning platform that helps students succeed in Cambridge, IB, and other international curriculums with expert mentorship, structured learning support, and engaging resources.